Seth Williams. Long time no see.
How have you been?
I'm well. How have you been?
Outstanding. Outstanding. God is good. I'm very blessed and very fortunate to be back in Philadelphia.
Amen. Amen.
That's right.
So tell us what is new since we've been back in town. You claim to be a new man now. You spent almost 3 years behind bars and have been out of jail for a while. What did you learn from your time in prison?
Oh, there's so much, and there's so many places where I could begin. But as you know, my first 5 months, I was in solitary confinement. So I was all alone in a 7-foot by 12-foot concrete and steel cell, all by myself. I lost my reputation, I lost my elected office, I lost my pensions, I lost my military career, I lost my law license, I lost my house, my liberty, most importantly, time with my daughters and loved ones and family and friends. But what I really learned from that is when God was all I had, God was all I needed. And it was just an amazing journey. I tell folks that I lost so much, but in hindsight, I really gained a lot, as crazy as that might seem. And so it began a very spiritual journey, being alone. Now, don't get me wrong, it's very difficult and challenging. The United Nations, Amnesty International, the Obama Department of Justice all say that anything more than 10 days of solitary confinement is deleterious to your mental health.
Yeah.
So it was very difficult. But I developed friendships, screaming through the wall and under the door and through the plumbing vents with inmates in adjacent cells. And so I really began to learn a lot about myself. I read a great book called Born Again. It was written by Chuck, what was Chuck's last name? But anyway, he'd worked for President Nixon. And what I learned from that was that I had to lose all of those things that I told you I lost, so I could become the person I'm supposed to be. And there were a lot of people that I thought would have written me, supported me, and I had to let that go, and the anger that I had. It's almost like I had to release all of that, and a lot of people that really weren't my friends that I thought were. And I've grown to accept that. But it's been an amazing journey.
Piggybacking off that question, this is a little difficult.
Right.
But some have a jaded perception
Sure.
of you because of your former status and the crimes you committed while in a higher office.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say to those people who maybe have felt betrayed, that maybe you let them down?
Well, I believe I hurt no one more than I hurt my daughters. And I owe them a great deal of, I can never apologize to them enough. And it'll be the rest of my life trying to rebuild my relationship with them, for all that they lost. I recognize, and I'm very grateful to Philadelphia to have made me their district attorney, the first African-American district attorney in the Commonwealth's history. And so to all the people that I did let down, I can only say that I'm sorry. I ask for their forgiveness. For the people that I did help, I wish I could have helped more. For the people that I couldn't help, I wish I could have done something. And for all the people that were supportive of me through all of this, I can't thank them enough. But I recognize, of course, that a lot of people had great expectations for me. I would only say that, God's not finished with me yet. And I think I'm going to be doing even better things, just different things.
Absolutely. On that note, you're a very spiritual man. Mm-hmm. You wrote a book. Tell me how your spirituality and relationship with God has changed your life.
So I tell folks I was raised Catholic. I was a head altar boy at St. Carthage.
We're at your church right here.
Yeah, we're at my church now, the African Episcopal Church of St. Thomas. Mm-hmm. I was raised Catholic, and I'll never denounce my Catholicism, but I go to a different church now. I'm a church that I love, and a church that was very supportive of me while I was away. But despite having been raised Catholic and going to church every Sunday or 3 Sundays out of the month, right, I had never read the Bible from first page in Genesis to the last page in Revelation until I was alone in solitary confinement. As a young Catholic boy, I always wanted God to talk to me. And I thought that meant that a cloud would come in my window with an angel playing a harp, and he or she would talk to me. And while I was away, I came to learn that God does speak to us, almost every day. Are we listening? And he speaks to us through other people, through situations, through the beauty of nature. And so I began having daily just inspirations. I could talk to you for hours about them, but one day I was very sad and depressed. I'm writing a letter to my daughters, and I said, you know what, I just got to stop. Let me just pray. Because I had already been sentenced, but I hadn't been sent to the prison I was going to go to. I was thinking, how am I going to do this for 5 years? 60 months. God, I need God's help. I need him to give me hope. So I started praying. So being a good Catholic boy, I just reached in my pocket and I pulled out a rosary and I started saying my Our Fathers and Hail Marys. And I did that for about 5 minutes. And I said, you know what? Let me just put the rosary away. I need to have just some Baptist prayer. I need just to talk to God directly. So I started doing that, asking God to give me hope. Like, how can I get through this? How am I going to do this? After about 10 minutes of that, I said, you know what? Let me just have Quaker meeting. I'd gone to a Quaker school, Friend Central. And the Quakers believe that God is in all of us, in everything. And that God speaks to us in silence. So I crossed my legs like a good Quaker little boy, and I sat on my bed in my cell all by myself in silence, waiting for God to talk to me in silence. And about 5 minutes later, I heard on my door, on the cell door. I go to the cell, and it was the only black correctional officer in the special housing unit, the SHU. That's what it's called, the hole. People assume you watch the movies, it's called the hole. And I go to the door, and he also happens to be a black Baptist minister of a black church. And his name was Mr. Akano. And I said, hey, Mr. Akano. He said, Mr. Williams. He has a thick Nigerian accent. Mr. Williams, did Nelson Mandela kill anyone? I was like, no. Did you kill anyone? I was like, no. Mr. Williams, you are a smart man. You are an educated man. God loves you. Have faith. You will get through this. And he walked away. And it was like, everything I've been praying for in the last half hour, this guy said in like 15 seconds. Wow. And so I began having experience after experience like that, right? Mm-hmm. So the very next day, I went to rec. So I'm in my cell every day for 23 hours. I get 1 day out of my cell, Monday through Friday. I'm in my cell all day, Saturday and Sunday. And as a very social person, right, you knew me as a just friendly, vivacious. Being alone, all by yourself, is just very difficult. So they would come to my cell. They'd have a door in the cell called a wicket. I had to bend down. They handcuffed me and then walk me through the hall handcuffed to my own caged area, like a dog pen, that's 7 feet by 12 feet for me just to have fresh air. But you're still not really outdoors. There's a roof and a cyclone fence about 3 feet. That's about from 12 feet to 15 feet up in the air. But that was the only time really I could socialize with other inmates because they were in their own cages.
Did you, let me stop you for a second. Did you ever explain to us why they put you in solitary confinement in the first place?
They claim they did it for my own safety, and that I was the district attorney.
Yes.
But the reality, Jenny, is that the inmates in that prison would have hurt other inmates that wanted to hurt me, because they would send me through the correctional officers to my cell envelopes where they wanted me to help them write a letter to their mother. write a letter to their judge or their attorney or their girlfriend or their children. And they would give me cookies or snacks, right? And so I found myself helping people learn how to read. Guys would yell through the halls, crazy as it's a funny story. Yo, DA. Right? They all knew I was a district attorney. How you spell obey? I said, like Old Bay, like the seasoning? No, like she got to listen to you. Oh, that's obey, O-B-E-Y. So I found myself teaching, right? So one day I'm at rec. I'm standing there in my caged area, and an inmate comes up to me. And he says, Mr. Williams, may I speak to you? I'm like, again, a very thick Nigerian accent. I was like, yeah. And he starts telling me his story. His name was Bright Ogado. And he tells me that he has a master's degree in finance from Brooklyn University. That he was a real estate guy and he got caught up in some sort of transaction, and now he found himself charged with some sort of real estate fraud, mortgage fraud. Mm-hmm. He was in general population. He felt as though he had ashamed his family, right? Let them down, brought great disgrace and dishonor to his family's name. His father was a Nigerian diplomat. He had 5 children and a wife. And he said he found himself in the prison, but then he got into a fight with a young inmate. A young inmate came into his cell wanting to use his toilet. What he didn't know is in this prison, it's an 8-story prison, like 6th and 7th and Arch, right?
Yeah.
5th and Arch. And people take water out of the toilet to talk to other inmates below or above you. It's called the cell phone, as crazy as that is.
Oh my goodness.
So he didn't know that, and he said no. So the kid hit him, and he hit him back. And he had a big scar on his forehead, a big bandage. And he said he'd been in solitary for about a week, and he decided it was just all too much for him. Letting his family down, the disgrace he brought to his family, how the difficulties they'd have with him being in prison. And now being in solitary was just too much. And he decided to take his own life. And he had just written his family his suicide letter. And right after he had written the letter and he put it in the envelope, sealed the envelope, he looked through the window of his cell and he saw them walking me through the hall handcuffed. And he said to himself, that is Mr. Williams. He was the DA. He has lost much more than I'll ever lose. Yet he is still standing. If he can survive, so shall I.
Wow.
And it blew my mind. I was like, wait a minute, let me get this straight. Are you telling me that you didn't commit suicide because you saw me here? He was like, yes, Mr. Williams. I was like, so I know it's a long story, but it began to change my opinion of everything, right? And I think it's important to understand. You want to know how I feel and how I grew to accept what happened to me. Everyone had been telling me to read the book of Job in the Bible, right? And Job lost everything.
Right.
And the punchline to Job was, God tells him basically, look, you came in the world with nothing, you're going to leave with nothing. Always bless the name of the Lord. Thank the name of the Lord, right? But more importantly, it was that Job had to recognize that God's in control, right? So I'm trying to understand life through that perspective. But then as a result of what Bright told me, and the guy's name, Bright Ogado, his name actually means light of God. There's a story in Genesis about a guy named Joseph. Joseph's brothers are jealous of him. They think he's the favored son. So the brothers decide, we're going to kill him. We're going to throw him in a pit. Then they say, you know what, we're going to sell him to slave traders coming down the road there in Egypt. And they sell him. He becomes a slave in Egypt. He becomes the best slave to a guy named Potiphar. Potiphar's wife thinks this guy Joseph is 17, he's cute. I want him. So she wants him to make love to her. I'd never read this story in Catholic school, but this is like in Genesis.
Yeah.
And he says, no, that'd be an abomination. I'm in charge here. Your husband trusts me. I can have everything here but you. So then she claims that he raped her. He gets falsely accused, placed in jail. He becomes the best inmate. ultimately, the Pharaoh makes him the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. He begins rotating the crops. The rest of the world in the Mideast is having famine. But by the way he's rotating the crops, Egypt becomes the great superpower in the Mideast economically. His brothers come, he's good to them. The punchline to the story of Joseph in Genesis 50:20 is that what others intended for my harm, God meant for good and the saving of many lives.
Absolutely.
So that is how I've begun to look at my life, that yeah, in one perspective, what I thought me losing all of these things was terrible for me. It's the battle is God's, not mine, and all this is happening for a reason, right? Like Picasso's art, if you go to the art museum, right? Cubism. So you see my ear from 5 feet away, it looks like this. But from 20 feet away, it looks different. But it's the same ear. It's all in perspective.
Totally. Well, let me ask you about...
So I've come to see all of this as a greater good. I was away. I taught GED. 19 of my students earned their GED.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So I saw that before, as the DA, I talked about we have to address the root causes of crime. Well, I went into the belly of the beast, lived in a prison. I began to see the criminal justice system from a different perspective. I think I have a unique perspective now on the criminal justice system. But I began to see the men and women that are in the criminal justice system more than just files and numbers and cases, but as three-dimensional people.
That's a perfect segue to my next question. I want to talk a little bit about our current DA, Larry Krasner, and his approach to crime fighting. I read in an interview with NBC 10 that you felt that locking people up wasn't necessarily the best answer to preventing crime. What do you mean by that? That serious crimes don't deserve serious penalties, or what is your alternative?
All right, so I began to believe that we needed to be smart on crime as an assistant district attorney, but I never really thought about criminology. I was just an assistant district attorney. I thought I was doing a good job every day. I thought I was trying to bring about justice for the victims and the defendants, okay? The reason why I got involved with wanting to be in the criminal justice system, you know, at a very young age, Sergeant Frank Von Collin was murdered across the street from my home. My father was in charge of the playground at 63rd and Catherine. The bottom of the hill was a park guard house. In 1970, the August of 1970, a Philadelphia police officer was murdered. That's wrong.
Right.
How the police overreacted and abused African American men in the neighborhood, that was wrong too. Okay?
Sure.
I grew up wanting to make the criminal justice system more fair, but also recognizing that we have to prevent crime and fight for victims. So I tried to reform the criminal justice system as much as I could when I ran for district attorney the first time, and the lovely Kia Gregory of the Philadelphia Weekly wrote a great story about me then. I won in 2009. I became the first African American district attorney in 2010 under the theory of having to create community-based prosecution.
Right, you were the first African American DA.
Right. We had to have partnerships between the DA's office, police, the clergy. That's why I'm glad we're here at a church, you know, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations working together. I had a great partnership with Commissioner Ramsey. We created GunStat. We created focused deterrence. We saw the homicide rate in Philadelphia go from highs in the 1960s, the 80s, down to all-time lows, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. Now it's astronomically high again.
The highest it's ever been.
They got rid of community-based prosecution. They got rid of focused deterrence. Again, I don't want to get into any type of name-calling with the current district attorney, okay, so follow me. But I think it is a false choice for us to believe we have to either reform the broken criminal justice system and all of its systemic racism or classism and how it's difficult for poor people of any color, white, black, brown, right? It's a false choice between reforming the criminal justice system and ensuring public safety. No, we have to do both. But again, what do I mean? We can't incarcerate our way out of crime. We have to address the root causes. We have to hold people accountable that do break the law. Don't get me wrong, okay? But your husband, Terry, my friend, he would prefer that Jenny DeHuff wasn't shot. Not that she was shot and the police then apprehended the doer and prosecuted the defendant. Okay? Your family prefer you weren't shot. So if that's the case, we have to do all that we can to reduce the potential for gun violence. Right? We have to do all that we can to reduce the potential for burglaries, car thefts. Not just hold those accountable. And again, we have to address the criminogenic needs. What do different people need that do get arrested? Are they getting that currently in prison? No. So I learned more about that. But I recognize that if we're talking about gun violence, and I'm just still an outspoken advocate of doing all that we can to reduce gun violence. And what I say everywhere I have the opportunity is that we have to have a holistic approach. What does that mean? It's not just fancy words. It means that, okay, if I recognize that about, 8 out of 10 men that were in prison with me had some sort of mental health problem. Well, we have to have early intervention of mental health. We have to provide mental health treatment early on in community-based settings. We just can't wait for people to act out, get arrested, and then provide them with mental health treatment. You understand?
Sure.
The number one provider of mental health treatment in America is the Los Angeles County prison system. Number 2 is the New York City prison system. Number 3 is the Cook County prison system in Illinois, Chicago. Oh, we can identify when kids are in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade when they're like putting a magnifying glass and killing animals, right? Or pulling legs off of insects or hurting animals or pets or doing things in school. Let's get them the help they need early on, right?
So let me press you on this.
Sure.
Will you say who you are supporting in the DA's race between, Larry Krasner, Carlos Vega, or even Chuck Peruto?
Well, I know all 3 of them. So I'm not gonna. I don't know if me saying one thing or the other hurts or helps anyone. Okay, I do know that it's a false choice to think that we can only reform the criminal justice system. I find it ironic now that despite the fact that I have a felony conviction, captains of various police districts contact me and meet with me to ask me my ideas about what they can do to reduce gun violence because they don't feel they currently have a partnership. And you know all the different things that have happened. And I think now again, the district attorney has to hold accountable police officers that do bad things. There are many more good police officers, of course, but I think we saw this summer with the murder of George Floyd and protests across the world that we do have to have reforms in law enforcement, right? Prosecutors, police have to make systemic change. I get that. And I think that dovetails into what I'm talking about. We have to address the root causes of crime. It used to be, my predecessor, before I became the DA, they say that if your only tool is a hammer, you'll use that for whatever the problem is, right? My predecessor thought you had to put everybody in jail, no matter what it was. We had to talk tough. Well, the reality is that we do have to do more than that. We have to address why people are committing crimes. We have to do more to reduce recidivism, the rate of people who get arrested over and over and over. Right now, we're spending about $35,000 a year in Pennsylvania to send people to state prison. But we have about a 62% recidivism rate.
Headed right back.
So what we're doing doesn't work. So what can we do? Right? And so I was glad when I was the DA, I created more diversionary programs. I replicated one after District Attorney of San Francisco, what I believe, my philosophy as a DA was that we have to have more diversionary programs that people who have run afoul of the law somehow, what can we do to not give them a felony conviction? Because for too many people, once you have a felony conviction, it becomes an economic death sentence. There are too many barriers to a lot of people getting good jobs if they have a conviction, or getting housing. I returned home from prison and was denied an apartment because I have a felony conviction. Right?
I understand.
So it's very difficult. So I replicated a program called Back on Track that San Francisco District Attorney Kamala Harris had created. She's now our vice president. Mm-hmm. I flew out to San Francisco and then came back to Philadelphia and started The Choice Is Yours in partnership with JEBS. We got funding from the Lenfest Foundation, right? Jerry Lenfest and his wonderful wife helped us fund this program that costs about $4,000 a year. And instead of people getting a conviction, they got the literacy training, job skills training, actual vocational training. And if they completed the program in a year, we withdrew the charges and expunged their record. This program still exists. I spoke with people at JEBS recently. It only has a 10% recidivism rate. And it only costs $4,000 a year. So my point is, by addressing the root causes of why people are committing crimes, especially nonviolent crimes, by handling them differently, we can have better outcomes. Now, people that are significantly violent, that hurt people, we have to have timeouts for those individuals.
Right, I was just listening to a segment of Fresh Air on my way over here this morning, and one of the guests on was talking about how, it's very difficult for inmates, especially felony convicts, to get proper shoes and good food. But prison, I was thinking about it, prison isn't meant to be like normal life. It's not meant to be cushy. And especially if you're convicted of murder or rape. So there needs to be a harsh penalty for crimes of this nature. Don't you agree?
Well, I agree. But I think we have to conclude that we have to have experts help us determine what are the best ways to prevent crime and what are the best ways to address those that have committed crime. So what do I mean by that? We just can't have maybe people who are elected state representatives and state senators responding to the political whims of how the wind is blowing that day. We should really look at people with advanced degrees in criminology. What is it that a person that has committed a specific crime, what do we need that person to get? What are the criminogenic needs? Do they need a GED? Do they need life skills training, job skills training? What does this person need not to recommit that crime?
Fair
right?
enough.
And so if we're going to commit to what the science tells us, then we have to be kind of all in on that. You understand?
Yeah.
But I saw while I was away, the supermajority of the men that were in prison with me that had been drug dealers, for example, were very intelligent, good at math, good salesmen, but people want to be a part of a team. Just what choice did they get? Was it the Bloods and the Crips? Or I'm fortunate, I was on the Cobbs Creek Comets, a great basketball team at 63rd and Spruce, or Boy Scouts of America, right? Girl Scouts. People want to be a part of something. We have to provide them with the right choices. But the majority of the guys that I was with, and I taught GED, I think I probably learned more from them than they taught me. So I learned more humility and to listen. They never had problems getting jobs. They had jobs. They had problems keeping jobs. They didn't have the workforce readiness skills, show up on time, conflict resolution.
Sure.
Again, we're going to talk about gun violence reduction. We have to talk about conflict resolution skills. again, we have to talk about, well, why are people committing the crimes?
Mm-hmm.
The majority of gun violence in Philadelphia isn't committed by people in rival drug gangs in a shootout like in a bad 90s Steven Seagal movie. It's people who are involved with often criminal things. They have easy access to guns, but it's over basic arguments. And people lack the conflict resolution skills that you have, or a lot of people have. And so something that escalates from someone stepping on someone's Timberlands or fouling somebody on the basketball court, it escalates because everybody's trying to protect because they felt disrespected.
Right.
So at the micro level, in a prison TV room, or on the corners of 52nd and Market, or at the macro level between countries, the majority of conflicts come as a result of perceived disrespect.
I understand.
So what can we do to help primarily young black and brown men in Philadelphia learn how to handle those perceived disrespects,
Well,
so that we can reduce the gun violence that clearly takes too many lives?
absolutely. Well, we're getting to about the sum of my questions here for you. I know I kept you here for a while.
I'm here all day. Anything to help Terry's wife.
Thank you. Well, listen, you're often credited in your early days. Well, of course, we all know you're the very first black DA in the history of Philadelphia.
Pennsylvania.
And Pennsylvania is helping
Right.
to reduce gun violence and get guns off the streets, something
Right.
that is a pandemic here in
Right.
Philadelphia. What do you think was your greatest achievement? I mean, look, Kermit Gosnell is a case that I covered under your tenure. Your proudest achievement during your time in office, and also your greatest regret.
The greatest regret is that I received gifts from friends. I was living beyond my means. I had gotten divorced. I was trying to stay in the house, keep my daughters in private school, trying to keep them with the life that they had come accustomed to. And I had bills, and friends of mine helped me out. My regret is I should have not accepted some of my gifts. I should have reported all of them in accordance with the city's ethics rules. And I didn't do that, and I terribly regret that. I subsequently agreed with the city's ethics board to pay a fine. But my biggest regret is letting my daughters and family and the citizens down for not having dotted all the I's or crossed the T's because I was ashamed, right? My greatest accomplishment, other than I think my daughters and creating the church carnival at my old church, I was very proud of the reforms that we initiated in the DA's office. Community-based prosecution, making the district attorney's office work in partnership, not from a tower, right? But working with people to address the community-based needs. Different neighborhoods in Philadelphia have different needs and different problems. Some neighborhoods, it is gun violence. Some neighborhoods, it's just car thefts or burglaries. In a lot of communities, and people are more concerned about different things, vandalism. Mm-hmm. Community-based prosecution was that there's different police districts, and we had DAs assigned geographically based on crime. And they began to work with the police, the probation department, community groups, faith-based organizations to work together. And I had a great partner in Commissioner Ramsey and then Commissioner Ross, mm-hmm. who bought in 100% with community-based prosecution. So I think that was the greatest achievement. And we were very successful in improving statistically the outcomes of the DA's office, holding more cases for court, better outcomes. Again, we have to treat nonviolent people, first-time offenders. We have to give them help, but allowed us to use our resources to focus on what I thought was the greatest problem at the time, was the gun violence. Mm-hmm. And by creating the gun violence task force, by creating focused deterrence, we saw significant reductions in gun violence. At the same time, I tripled the number of DAs in our charging unit to make sure we only charge the right people and only with the right crimes. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud now that Deb Ryan, who was an assistant DA for me, is now the district attorney in Chester County. A young man who I gave a job as an assistant district attorney, Tanner Rouse, is the first assistant district attorney in Delaware County. Mike Barry, who I supervised when he started the DA's office in the municipal court, is the first assistant in Chester County. So I'm very proud of that and the work that they're doing, and relationships that I built with the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. So those were the things I was proudest of as the DA.
Awesome.
But now, I'm very excited about opportunities that I have now, from what I learned from those experiences, my life journey in prison, to hopefully what I can do now to still help.
So that leads me to what is next for you in life? Where can we find you these days?
I'm very fortunate. When I got home, George Mosey, who had been my first assistant district attorney, is now the executive director of the Philadelphia Anti-Drug, Anti-Violence Network, PAN. And he and his employees do a phenomenal job going out directly in the community to intervene in violence as violence interrupters, and trying to help young men and women who might be addicted to get into recovery and to also address the violence on our streets. So since July, I've been working as a consultant with PAN and doing Zoom discussions with young folks that are in diversionary programs. I worked at a huge, I don't want to give their name because I really kind of did not like working for them, but it was a great learning experience. I worked at a national chain, a home improvement store,
Okay.
From 7 p.m. to 5:30 a.m. every day, stocking shelves and filling internet orders. But I began seeing that the people I was working with were just salt of the earth, great folks. Most of them were young men that were returning citizens, had criminal records. And I thought I was in the right place again at the right time, as I had been with Bright Agato, because when all these things happened during the summer after the murder of George Floyd, a lot of my coworkers were angry. I thought I hoped I could redirect their anger into healthy ways, right, and give them hope and inspiration. My friend Roosevelt Harrison gave me a job at the Hairston Foundation, where I was trying to help him employ more returning citizens. But now I have a wonderful opportunity, and I was named last week to be the program director of the HJH Vocational Training Center here in Philadelphia. So in 1977, a guy named Herb Holter founded NCIA, the National Center for Institutional Alternatives, as a way of, instead of sending people to prison, to give them and give courts and judges and prosecutors alternatives. That blossomed into programs, institutions. He has residential and non-residential programs for people with learning disabilities in Maryland. In 2017, they founded a vocational training center to give chronically underemployed and unemployed veterans and returning citizens vocational training. HVAC, culinary arts, getting their CDL commercial driver's licenses, getting their FAA certification to be drone pilots. Wow. As crazy as that is, but
yeah.
The top 10 jobs in America now didn't exist 10 years ago. And so I'll be a part of this. I'll be the director in creating this program in Philadelphia. We have funding from the Truist Foundation to train people at no cost for 15 weeks to get training, vocational training, to change their lives. Again, what I learned while I was in prison, and there was a study at Harvard, about 85% of the skills in the workforce, right, the people that work for you at Philadelphia Weekly, 85% of the skills that your reporters, your photographers, your copy set, whatever the people are that work for you, 85% of the workforce stuff has nothing to do with their specific vocation. It's how do they get along with their coworkers? How do they help you market Philadelphia Weekly? How do they interact with people? 85%. So in addition to the vocational training skills of HVAC and culinary arts, I'm going to be teaching them, and my instructors are going to be teaching them the workforce readiness skills that they need to not only get a job, but more importantly, thrive in the workforce, to remain in the workforce, to succeed, to stay in their job and not go back to jail. So I'm really excited about this. And I really think, though, it fits with, I used to always tell people, and I probably told you when you had other jobs, my dad was a school teacher here in Philadelphia. He worked at the rec center in our neighborhood at 63rd and Spruce, Cobbs Creek Recreation Center. He ran a day camp every summer. And what I learned was, despite me being the DA, my dad did much more than I'll ever do to prevent crime by being making a direct impact in the lives of kids and their families and helping them learn. And so I'm going to do that now. On a ground level, daily, helping folks that have criminal records, people that are coming home from prison, homeless veterans, right? Give them hope by giving them jobs.
Wow.
And that's what I'm excited about. So I hope that you could share in your article some kind of way that we have free training. I hope to have my first cohort group, my first class by April the 12th.
Okay.
And anybody that wants information can visit our website at ncianet.org. They can send me an email at seth.williams@ncianet.org. And really, I got to get the information out because we have free training, and this is a great way to break the cycle of criminality, break the cycle of addiction, to reduce recidivism, to prevent crime by teaching people vocational skills and getting them ready for work.
Wow. Well, it sounds like I will help you get that message.
Thank
It sounds
you.
like you have a ton going on. Seth Williams, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It has been a blast catching up with you.
Well, it's always great to catch up with you. And again, I really owe a lot to the Philadelphia Weekly. And Philadelphia Weekly did the first major, in-depth story on who Seth Williams was the first time I ran for district attorney. I didn't win that time, but really helped the trajectory of us talking about being smart on crime and not just talking tough, and solutions to preventing crime. And Kia Gregory did that, and I'm very thankful. And again, every year is the year of the Terry. So anything I can do to help Terry's wife, I'm glad to be of assistance.